and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 21 of the AFL season was huge, with plenty of games potentially having a big say on the final makeup of the top 8. The Crows outlasted the Hawks in one of the games of the year. Brisbane outplayed Collingwood at the G, just to remind everyone who the defending champs are. And Freo finished the round with a scare, coming from behind to beat Carlton to continue their momentum towards September. This week on Finders Keepers, I'll be running through the things I noticed across the round, as well as looking at my top waiver picks for the week. And then I'll finish with some questions from the listeners. And this week I have a commissioner who has written in advertising a couple of vacant spots in a deep dynasty league for next season. So if that's something that you might be interested in, keep listening for the details on that. And then finally, I'll bring you more details about the competition Finders Keepers will be running in the final weeks of the season, with the winner being offered a spot in a keeper league that I play in called Coaches Keepers. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, make sure you keep listening and you'll be able to find out more info on that later in the podcast. So let's take a look now at the things I noticed across round 21. And it started on Thursday night with the Bulldogs and the Giants in a big game. Didn't live up to the expectations. The Bulldogs smashed them. It was a one-sided game from the very start. And yeah, there wasn't a lot I took out of this game from a keeper point of view. I mean, Aaron Norton, another 5 goals to him, and he's now up to 4th in the Coleman medal, which says a lot about the season he's had. And yeah, it's great to see him and Darcy. I mean, I said this last week, but just to see him and Darcy working in tandem, and they both kicked 5 goals this week. In fact, it was the second week in a row they've both kicked 5 in it, and I think that was some sort of record. Anyway, the tall timber looking very good for the Bulldogs. The other guy I want to talk about is Riley Garcia, who is, this year I've been more focused on Hugo Garcia over at St Kilda, no relation. But they're kind of similar players in that, they've been given a bit of a look in their midfields and they both look pretty good. So Riley, the Bulldog, he averaged 124 in the VFL last year from 8 games. And his 3 VFL games this year, he's averaged 117. Now, he's not quite hitting the scores at the AFL level just yet, but he's getting a pretty good look at the centre bounces. And he's looked pretty good from what I've seen. So yeah, his scoring's around the 60s, 70s, nothing exciting there. But he's one of those ones that the role looks to be there at the moment. Could be one to get before he pops a big score. Anyway, I'll be watching him again this week. Nothing really caught my attention for the Giants. Just a really poor game from them. On to Friday night, and what a cracker this was, Adelaide and Hawthorn. A game of momentum, swings like you've never seen almost. Hawks out of the blocks, then the Crows, but then the Hawks in the third. Anyway, it was pretty exciting as a Crows fan to see Adelaide hold on for a very important win. And the first guy I want to talk about, Dan Curtin, who's put up another 93 and for the second week in a row was pushed into the midfield in the last quarter. So that happened last week as well. And this week it came at the expense of James Peatling, who wasn't having a great game anyway this week. But Curtin's really exciting because, he's got that height, he's got that overhead marking ability, which makes him such a weapon on the wing. And not only just because he provides an option for a big kick down the line, but when if he could roll forward and take his wingman with him. So on the weekend, commentator made a great point. Curtin had just rolled forward and he was up against Harry Morrison in the forward 50, which is a very good matchup for the Crows. So he's such a great player, Curtin. Seeing him go into the midfield, though, has got me really excited for what he can do down the track. And he's got he's a bit like a Marcus Bontempelli type player, I reckon. And yeah, Crows have got a ripper there, and the fantasy scores he's already putting up tells me he's going to be a very good fantasy player in the future. Alex Neil-Bullen deserves a mention. He scored 91. That's his third 90-plus score in a row, averaging 111. And I've sort of ignored it for a couple of weeks because the Crows had some big wins and he can score well on his day. But he's done it 3 weeks in a row now, playing at high half forward, getting up the ground with pressure and then working back the other way and kicking goals. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see if he can make it 4 in a row. But I'd be surprised if he suddenly became a consistent scorer. But certainly for owners, the last 3 weeks have been fantastic. Not so much for Isaac Rankin owners. He scored 82, and that was saved by a huge last quarter because he scored 40 of his 82 points in the last quarter. Interestingly, when the Crows sent him to the middle for a little bit. And it's an interesting one with Rankin. Like, as a fantasy, in the fantasy world, we want to see him on the ball because his numbers are clearly much better. But for the Crows, their scoring efficiency has been better with him back forward. So it's an interesting one. I reckon if you own Rankin, you could be a little bit concerned about his ceiling moving forward, but just know that he'll always have forward status and the Crows will always use him at times in the midfield. So he's still a pretty handy player to own, and still pretty young too, which is a bonus. For Hawthorn, James Worpel was the starting sub, which took me by surprise. He came on, scored 37 and, looked his usual self. But I wonder if he was the sub because they went in with the 4 talls in the forward line, Hawthorn, and I guess the plan was always to pull one of them. In the end, I think it was Kausha Deer who got subbed out. But, yeah, I don't know what's happening with the Hawks midfield. I think I've talked about a few times, and I'll talk about Will Day in a minute. But, if Worpel's not getting a start in that midfield, I don't know where he's at. There's lots of talk of him moving potentially to Geelong next year. Jai Newcomb's not in great form either. So look, it was really exciting to see Will Day return last week, and in this game he looked excellent. He was just warming up before, unfortunately for him and Hawthorn, the injury is once again struck and his season is over. Really, really disappointing for Day, and you'd think someone like Cam McKenzie has to come back in this week to cover that spot, and Worpel won't be the sub again. But I don't know, the Hawks midfield mix really interests me, and they've got to find something that really works before September. On to Saturday, Melbourne and West Coast, and I think West Coast were competitive for parts, but Melbourne kicked away, as most sides have done against the Eagles this year. And the first guy is a former Eagle, Jai Culley. Remember him? He's a big-bodied midfielder the Eagles took with pick 1 in the mid-season draft going back 2022. And things just didn't work out for him at West Coast. He had lots of injuries, and in the end they let him go, and Melbourne pounced. So this was his first game for the D's and his first AFL game since round 20 last year. And he scored 78. I think there was a bit of junk time in the last quarter, but I think he was playing on a flank, and he's just someone that's always had a pretty good name in the keeper fantasy world. As soon as I saw him named last week and saw he was probably not going to be the sub, I was quite excited to see what he could do. And it's a great score first up. And I think Melbourne they just have to play him for the rest of the year and try and build some continuity into him and get him set for a big 2026. Caleb Windsor was a surprise centre bounce guy last week, and he had even more of it this week for the D's. He scored 68, but as I said, was one of the main guys at the centre bounces for Melbourne, which is really interesting. And I thought last week was one out of the box. They've done it again this week. Clearly that's where they see him for the time being. I thought he was going to be more of a wing, maybe half-back guy for a while. But, let's see what happens with this midfield role. And then the knock-on effect was Christian Prochaka played more forward, and I think it was the least amount of time he'd spent at centre bounces this season, or at least for a fair while. He scored 78, and, he hasn't had a great year, and coaches would be frustrated, but I reckon he's going to keep forward status based on recent games anyway. And if he does leave Melbourne, someone was talking about it on the weekend, a commentator, I can't remember who, about him potentially leaving and going to, say, a Hawthorn. Like, if he went to Hawthorn now, he would just be their number one mid straight away. There'd be no forward time. And if that happens, he could have a big scoring year while still maintaining that forward status for those who currently own him. So he's a watch. For West Coast, it was great to see Campbell Chesser in for his first game of the year, a high draft pick from a couple of years ago. He played plenty of games last year, but I just feel like we haven't really seen what he can be in a fantasy sense. And, a bit like Cully, he's another name that, if he's floating around and he's getting games, could be a good idea to grab and just chuck him in your... stash him away and see what happens with him. He scored a 70, which is a pretty good return for his first game of the year. Tim Kelly had his highest centre bounce attendance percentage split since round 6 and scored 93. I know I've been waiting for a while for this from Tim Kelly. I mean, he was moved to the half-forward flank, picked up forward status. Scoring has been terrible, but I just felt like at some point he would go back to the midfield mix. And I guess the injury to Harley Reid has allowed that. But, if Kelly's scoring in the 90s and he's still got that forward status, he's very appealing to me. And then lastly, Ryan Marrick, who is officially back to that juicy half-back role that made him popular this year. So they moved him up to the wing, and he started scoring, not as well. But the last 2 weeks, he's been taking the kick-ins again and he's gone back again. So 112 he put up. That's his best score of the year. And with that forward status, he'd be super handy for the next few weeks if he can keep that role. On to Saturday Arvo, we had 2 twilight fixtures, the first of which was Gold Coast and Richmond. And I didn't see any of this game, but tracking the scores, it just looked like Gold Coast did as they pleased for the whole game. Wasn't really a lot that I took out of it. Alex Davies I was interested to see again. Now, he only scored 53, which is, half of what he achieved last week. But he kept the same role in the midfield, which I think is pleasing if you grabbed him. Didn't get as much of the pill this week. And then for Richmond, just Sam Banks. I think owners can officially rest easy now in that Jayden Short's been back for a while and he is not impacting this guy. Banks is he's just the new Short, and I think he's probably one of the pickups of the year if you grabbed him. 103 he scored, and he just looks like just a fantasy gun for the future, doesn't he? The other twilight game had Sydney and Essendon, which I think, again, I didn't watch, but I think Essendon put up a good effort considering, the challenges that side has at the minute. But Sydney were good enough. And a big reason for that was the performance of Brodie Grundy, who is this week's Finders Keepers Player of the Week. I don't think it's the first time he's won this award this season, but he put up some ridiculous numbers. 11 kicks, 28 handballs, 8 marks, 32 hitouts for a whopping score of 150. And I think I saw it's a record for the most touches by a ruckman. He had 39 possessions. It's just extraordinary. Look, there's not really much else I can say about Grundy. I talk about him every week because he just continues to put up these monster scores. One thing I did hear today, which may explain this crazy turn of form we've seen from Grundy this year. I heard that his brother is currently number 1 in AFL fantasy at the moment in the classic format. So my theory is Grundy's performing like this so he can win his brother a car. Which, to be fair, was a lot funnier when I wrote that down, but saying it out loud, it wasn't. That's funny. Anyway, moving on. Well done, Grundy, though. What a season he's having. Nothing else really for the Swans. A bit to talk about with Essendon, and there's no surprise there because with all the injuries they've got, we're starting to see players in different roles and they're trying different things. So anything that sticks is something that we've got to pay close attention to. And Andy McGrath is an interesting one who he picked up some centre bounces last week, maybe the week before. So he's continued that run. He was one of the most, him and Merritt were pretty much at every centre bounce. And he put up a 92. He top scored for the Bombers. I don't mind it, McGrath. Like, you know, he's been a pretty frustrating player across his journey for coaches, but he's got defender status, obviously. If they can find maybe a midfield role for him moving forward, I mean, it is hard to see when all their players are back. But I'm just not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up with a permanent role change, you know, next year and beyond as a midfielder. So let's just wait and see on him. A couple other names. I mean, it was cool to see Blackiston have a big share of the ruck with Goldstein. I mean, I think they recruited him as a key defender, but they've put him in the ruck. So Goldstein and Blackiston shared the ruck. The centre bouncers split was 60-40, and then around the ground, Peter Wright helped out a lot in the ruck. And then just lastly, just really disappointing efforts from Perkins and Hobbs. I mean, this is a time where those two have a real opportunity to shine, stand up and say, hey, we should have been played from the start. Now, neither of them got any centre bounces, so, you know, they're not getting that run in the midfield, but they're just not getting the footy. They're not impacting the game at all. And, yeah, I think some questions on their long-term future at the Bombers. And then Dylan Shield. I mean, I talked him up in the Classic game. I talked him up in drafts as this guy to have for the run home to maybe win you a flag. He's playing on the ball. He has defender status. Just another terrible score. I don't think he even got past 50. So, yeah, some disappointing names there. And it'll be an interesting few weeks for Essendon finishing off the season. The Saturday night fixture, Collingwood-Brisbane at the G. Gee, I was looking forward to that one, especially after the Crows got up Friday night. Couldn't wait to watch these two duke it out. And Brisbane looked really solid. Collingwood had just slipped in a little last few weeks, and Brisbane took advantage and got a much-needed win. For the Pies, Jordan De Goey was back after a long spell out with injury, and he looked in great shape playing midfield. I thought I didn't expect to see him in the midfield straight up, but yeah, he looked really in good touch. They subbed him out in the third quarter, which was obviously, you know, the plan all along. I don't know. I feel like they needed him to keep playing, and I get the idea behind, you know, not wanting to push him in his return, and they had a plan to sub him out, so they stuck with it. And Bobby Hill came on. I just think it's strange when sides do that. I mean, what if Collingwood had got an injury and they subbed someone else and De Goey had to play the rest of the game? Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like they should have left him out there. He was playing well and they lost. Ned Long had a quiet game. He scored 46. And he's been great this year. He's been a revelation, a really smart pickup from the Pies. But there's been a bit of an awkward conversation, you imagine, that's been had since Tom Mitchell returned to full fitness. And I said last week, don't worry about it. The two of them played together and they looked like they played well together, and then they dropped Mitchell, which, it's just going to be interesting to see how this finishes, because you imagine there's only a spot for one of Long or Mitchell in September. So Long had a poor game. Does this open the door for Tom Mitchell to come straight back in? I guess we'll find out in a few days' time. For Brisbane, Henry Smith had a big game, and I'll be honest, I had to ask myself, who is Henry Smith? I'm not that familiar with him. It was his 4th career game and his first this season. And they talked about him on the call, how he's been around a while, hasn't had much luck. And he looked excellent. He played a great game. He kicked 3 goals, but geez, he took some big marks at big times. Even outmarking guys like Darcy Moore. And yeah, he looks great, Smith. He helped out in the ruck too. Good night for him. And then the other young forward they've got, Logan Morris. He scored a 96, kicked 6 goals straight. And he's just so impressive for such a young forward in such a, well, it's his 2nd season. Yeah, incredible. 2nd year player. He's already won a premiership. Yeah, he's exciting. And then the last one, Cam Rayner, and he's crept up on me a little bit, I reckon. I haven't noticed his form. So he put up a 99 in this game. He's averaging 85 in his last 7 games, and he's never averaged, even 70 in a season before. He's getting close. He's sitting at 68. His average now, and yeah, in hot form. No real change to where he's playing. I think he's just playing with more confidence, and geez, he's a hard tackler too. When he tackles you stay tackled, and I think he's just got that confidence, and he's playing really well. And for those who have owned him for years and have been waiting, this is a nice little run for him. Hopefully it continues. On to Sunday's games, and it started with St Kilda and North Melbourne. And North, much more competitive, stayed with the Saints, but just couldn't get them in the end. St Kilda picking up another win. And Nasiah Wanganeen-Miller, last week's hero, had another big game playing mostly as a midfielder. Scored 108. He was actually on 100 at 3/4 time. And then I read that Finn O'Sullivan ran with him in the last quarter and just held him to just 8 points in the finish. So, yeah, it's one of the curious parts of Wanganeen-Miller's season and his ascension to one of the best players in the game. I'm just not sure how many sides have really tried to tag him, or if it's a case of they've tried to tag him, it's just not effective because he's so good. It's interesting to see how sides target him in the final few weeks. Now, Rowan Marshall owners have endured a bit of a nerve-wracking season, I reckon. Starting in round 1 when they named up Harry Boyd to play alongside Marshall. Then all season there's been talk of St Kilda offering a ransom for the services of Tom De Koning from Carlton, which means, what happens with Marshall at the Saints if that happens. And then just in recent weeks, we've seen Max Heath given a run. He debuted, and then would have been painful on Friday because Heath had been in for a few weeks, then was out. Then he was named on the extended squad, and then late Friday, you would have seen that he made the side. The good news is Heath played predominantly forward, kicked 2 goals, scored 69, did pretty well. Rowan Marshall was very much the main ruck. In fact, you wouldn't even say they shared the ruck duties. It was Marshall rucked, Heath did the chop out. So the centre bounce split was 87-13% Marshall's way. And then ruck contests around the ground, 76-22%, with a couple of other players jumping in there. And the result, well, the score that Marshall put up, a 142, absolutely fantastic. And yeah, I just think if you're a Marshall owner, you can just breathe a little lighter now because, yes, I think Heath stays in the side, but he's not overtaking Marshall or getting anywhere near those midfield ruck minutes that Marshall currently has, which is great. Not so great for Jack Steele owners, though, who was, before last week, absolutely flying Steele. He was starting to look like Steele of old. Huge tackling numbers and big tons. Then last week he had a poor game, and now this week he was named as the starting sub for St Kilda. And Ross Lyon's done some funny things with the sub this year, but this has to take the cake. He's the captain, their most important midfielder, and After the game, he said he's a bit sore and we thought we'd just rest him a bit. Again, I don't understand. Why would you not just give him the week off? So if you put Jack Steele as your starting sub with the plan to rest him, what if you cop an injury in the first quarter and he has to go out there and play the whole game? It's a strange risk that coaches take, that clubs are taking. And I guess it's just frustrating for the fantasy world because Jack Steele should not be the sub and scoring 25 at this point of the season. For North Melbourne, Harry Sheasel had a huge jump in midfield time and scored accordingly with a nice 117. I think we're all pretty keen on seeing Sheasel as a midfielder, as a more permanent fixture. Yes, the halfback spot is great for fantasy. The half forward role is good for them, because he's such a great user of the footy. But I just think this kid's born to play in the midfield. Let's just play him there. Anyway, they did in this game and it went well. George Wardlaw returned after he's had a shocking run, and they were quite cautious this time, playing him in the VFL for a fair bit. But he came in, scored 84, played a solid game from what I could tell, and it's just good to see him healthy again. Geelong took on Port Adelaide also on Sunday afternoon in what looked like a tight affair early, but Geelong got to business and gave Port Adelaide a big thrashing. This was an interesting game for late changes and subs, with Connor Rosey a late change. He was out with illness, and then Geelong had Jack Martin as the starting sub, which I guess in hindsight wasn't that surprising because of his performance last week. He was a bit quieter. It just would have thrown a lot of sides having to deal with both of those in the Classic game and in the draft and keeper games as well. For the Cats, Brian Myers is really starting to excite me because I noticed in recent weeks they've been using him at the centre bounces, and this week it was the third week in a row that he had this role, and he's actually up to 61% centre bounces this week. And the result was a big score of 122 and 30 touches for just the second time in his career. I really like this for Myers. He's been a great player, a great fantasy player for years, but I said in recent weeks, if he becomes a midfielder, I'll be much more confident in him as a consistent scorer. I mean, he's been pretty damn consistent. I think I said last week he's been underappreciated, maybe not even respected in the fantasy world. But yeah, if he's a midfielder next year with the forward status, I think that's going to be great news for owners. Lawson Humphreys has had a underwhelming year after getting those who grabbed him last year very excited with the way he performed last year. I haven't been too worried about him. It's just been a quieter second year, I think it is, for him. Now, he was the starting sub the week before, which has seemingly kickstarted some form because he put up a 104 this week. He had 20 kicks, I think 4 or 5 handballs, but 20 kicks, playing off half-back. He had 94% time on ground, and he took the most kick-ins for Geelong. So that is much more in line with what we were hoping for Humphreys this year, and I think coaches will be quite pleased with what they saw. Now, I mentioned Jack Martin before as the starting sub, and he came on in the third quarter, and it was quite remarkable. He kicked the 4 quickest goals in AFL history and scored 57 for the quarter. And it was amazing. I was talking to a mate on the phone about Dream Team Classic, and he had Jack Martin. We were trying to work out what happens if he doesn't get on the ground and if he does, or what he scores. And yeah, he was on 0 when we started talking, and then he came on the ground, he got a few touches, and by the time I wrapped up the phone call and got back to whatever I was doing and checked the scores, he kicked 4 goals from 4 kicks, and he was flying. Unbelievable. Wish I was watching, would have been great. Now, he only scored 11 in the last quarter to finish on 68. But I tell you what, if you're playing in a comp like, say, the Shiva draft where lockout is on the first Saturday game, and you had Jack Martin on field, and you saw the subs, and his name was there, you would have been devastated because you just wouldn't have picked it. And then when he came on in the third and you saw what he was doing, you would have been doing cartwheels. So quite the roller coaster for Jack Martin owners. And I don't know if he'd be the sub again. I feel like it was just a once-off, just to sort of manage him a touch. I'm not sure. But he certainly made a statement when he came on. For Port Adelaide, it was a down day. It's been a down period for them. Not really finishing off Ken Hinckley's coaching career in a blaze of glory, that's for sure. And look, losing Rosie was pretty painful for him. They'd already lost Bergman for the year. And yeah, nothing stood out for them except for the performance of Zach Butters, who scored 34 playing the whole game. And Ocean Mullen for Geelong just claims another victim. He's really etched out a name for himself, Mullen, as a terrifying tagger for fantasy coaches. If one of your guns is coming up against him, he kept Butters to just 10 touches of the footy, no marks, and that was Butters' lowest disposal tally since the shortened games way back in 2020. And Geelong has Essendon this week, so poor old Zach Merritt, who just got a big tag from James Jordan, is probably staring down the barrel of another one from Mullen this week. The last game was Fremantle and Carlton jumped out the blocks. Looked like an upset was on the cards, but credit to Freo, who did what they had to do, came back in the last quarter and got it's a very important win. They're all very important with how tight that ladder is in the top half. Nothing really stood out to me for Fremantle apart from the terrible news that Hayden Young has gone down with another injury. He'd just come back, and yeah, as it stands, I haven't got info on how serious it is. It's a groin issue, which I guess it's good. It's not the hamstring that he had surgery on, but there's an issue there, and yeah, fingers crossed for him because he's been very unlucky this year, and Freo need him. And Nat Fyfe actually could be back next week. I think he played a pretty good game in the Waffle this week, so maybe with Young out, we might see Fyfe give one last run around before, you'd imagine he calls time on his illustrious career. For Carlton, I was pretty excited about this one. Cooper Lord, feel like he's been my boy this year. And look, it took an injury to Adam Chera for Carlton to do it, but they finally put Lord back in the guts, back at the centre bounces, and gave him a job to run with Sarong, and he kept him pretty quiet and scored 87 himself, Lord. Only 6 kicks, but he laid 8 tackles and was used in heaps of handball chains. And big centre bounce numbers. I'm not sure what's happening with Chera, if he'll be back or not, but just come on, Carlton. Just play Lord as a midfielder for the last few games of the year, and then we all get a good look at it, see what he does. With Lord running with Sarong and Chera out, it did mean Paddy Cripps and George Hewitt had to step up, and they both had 36 touches each, which is a great haul. Some big scores from them. But unfortunately for the Blue Baggers, it just wasn't enough. And Freo got the win. Round 21 done, and that leaves just 3 rounds to go. And for many leagues, that'll mean their final series start this week. So let's have a look at my waiver wire pickups for the week. Hopefully I can help you. Let's have a look at, firstly, the players I put up last week. See how they performed, see how their ownership percentages have changed from last week. And I guess what to do if they didn't score well. So let's have a look. Last week. And the ownership percentages I'm talking about are from Keeper Fantasy, which is the format I choose to use for all of my draft comps, keeper comps. And then the percentage of ownership is only for keeper and dynasty leagues. So let's have a look at last week. Alex Davies for Gold Coast was very popular. He was 33% owned a week ago, and that shot up to 74% ownership. Now, he kept the same midfield role, but only scored a 53. I wouldn't be too discouraged by that if I'd picked him up a week ago. The important thing is the role. Let's see how he goes this week. Tyler Sonsi was another guy I put up. He was at 35% ownership and he shot up to 60%. So obviously those two good scores in a row put him on everyone's radar. And look, he didn't score very well this week, scored 46, but I think he was one of many Tigers down on the day. So yeah, not a great pickup at this point. Let's see what he does this week. Another guy I put up last week, which is a little bit out there, was Taylor Walker for the Crows. He was at 45% ownership. He remains around that mark, so not a lot of people did grab him. It just sort of popped in my head last week, the fact that we're approaching finals. The Crows have some pretty soft matchups to come. And yeah, look, he scored 67. He was huge for Adelaide late, kicked some clutch goals in that last quarter. And from what I'm hearing, there's a chance he's going to be rested this week because the Crows are going to Perth to take on West Coast. But I still don't mind the idea of Tex, round 24, Marvel Stadium against North Melbourne. He could be a good ringer for your side if you're in the grand final. And then the last one was Bailey Fritsch, who he's just been in great form and scoring well, and I couldn't believe he was only at 35% ownership last week. That's now up to 49%, and on the weekend he kicked 4 goals, scored another 88, and he's now got a 4-round average of 87. The only flag would be he's got a tougher finish. He's had some easier matchups, but now he comes up against the Dogs, the Hawks, and the Pies to finish. So for this week, who do I like? The names I've come up with: Jai Cully, he's at just 20% ownership. As I said when I spoke about him earlier, I was quite excited to see him named, and named on the field, I think. So I was confident he wouldn't be the sub. I grabbed him in one of the keepers I'm in just to get ahead of the pack. And yeah, scored 78, looked pretty good, and, you know, you'd think the D's play him for the rest of the year. So you get a good look at him. I reckon he's definitely worth a late season pickup there. And then the other guy, one of the others I've got, Shannon Neal for Geelong. He's at 50% ownership. He's had a great season. He's one of many young key forwards that are starting to really look appealing in the fantasy world. He's quite up and down, as any young tall would be, but he's just posted back-to-back tons in big wins for Geelong, and I wouldn't be surprised if those big wins continued, seeing as they finish with Essendon, Sydney, Richmond. There's a lot of talk about Jeremy Cameron. Can he kick enough to get to 100 for the season? Just don't discount Shannon Neal finishing pretty strong as well. And then Cooper Lord, who's at 62% ownership. So, and I've certainly spoken about him plenty of times in this segment this year. But yeah, I liked what I saw. I liked the midfield role. They gave him a job. He was running with Sarong. And as I said earlier, I don't know where Cher is at, but surely Carlton give him some more time in the midfield after that performance. I think he's a handy pickup, particularly if he's got the forward status. And then the last one, the Bulldogs, Riley Garcia, 46% ownership. You know, the scoring's not there. He's scoring sort of between 50, 60, 70, around that mark. But I like that he's getting centre bounce exposure, and watching the Bulldogs play, I've noticed him a few times. He's looking like a pretty good player for him. Big tackle numbers. And again, the sort of guy, if you grab him before he pops a big score, you'll have that advantage over the rest. So they're my 4 for this week. And then, as I like to do every week, let's go a little bit deeper and look at some options for a league that is much deeper than most, and the players in the pool are, well, slim pickings, as they say. So some names that could help you if you're in that position: Jai Farah, who's popped up at Gold Coast. He's played the last 2 games. We hadn't seen him at AFL level for a long time. Playing forward, but has a 71 and an 88 in his last two, thanks to obviously hitting the scoreboard, but laying plenty of tackles as well. He's at 16% ownership, playing in the forward line, but only has defender status in the fantasy world. And I guess you just got to be wary of him because, yes, he's put up two very nice scores, but that was in two very dominant performances, big wins for Gold Coast. So myself, I'd like to see him do it again. But like I said, if you're in a deep league and he's there, may as well grab him. The next one is Henry Smith for Brisbane. Now, his ownership's all the way down at 7%. It was his first game of the year, so that makes a lot of sense. He really impressed me. He scored 66, took some big marks, and really had an impact on the game. Now, the only reason I'd suggest him, well, this is the deeper section, but remember Logan Morris last year, in his first year at Brisbane, who made his way into the side and was largely an unknown. He ended up playing out the year and playing in a premiership. So I guess my point is Henry Smith, that was a great game, but does he keep his spot and play for the rest of the year? Based on last year, I don't see why not. Smith and Morris with Hipwood, it's a pretty good forward line for the Lions. Campbell Chesser for West Coast, he's at 18% ownership. Now, he's a mid only. I just think he's worth stashing if you can. He scored 70, first game of the year. We've heard about him in the past. Haven't quite seen it. But this isn't a bad time of the year to grab guys like this. Just stash them away. And it depends when your leagues do their delistings, but you can grab these guys now. And if your delistings, January, February, you've got all summer to have a look and see how they're tracking. Definitely worth grabbing. And now the last one's really out there and really is about the point I just made about if your delisting isn't until January, February, you've got all summer to see what happens. Will Brodie is at 17% ownership. Now, I wouldn't use a waiver pick. I'd just wait after Tuesday and grab him as a free agent, maybe. I just think it could be a smart move. I heard this week there's talk about Port Adelaide maybe wanting to bring him across. And the thing with Brodie is, I'm sure Freo supporters will have their own thoughts on him, but to my eye, he's a pretty good player and he's a great fantasy player when he plays midfield. He had that one great year years ago and he's pretty much just sat in the waffle ever since. So my point is, if he gets to Port Adelaide or another club and actually plays midfield, I think if you grab him now and you're able to hold him, you could be, rewarded handsomely if it comes off next year. So they're my picks for this week. Good luck. I hope if you grab one of them that you're glad you did and you end up praising Finders Keepers for showing you the way. Now, if you're enjoying Finders Keepers in its first season, make sure you've liked and subscribed wherever you're listening, and go over to X and find the Finders Keepers page at FindKeepAFL, where you can reach out to me and send any questions you have through and just stay up to date with everything that's happening with the podcast. We'll jump into the listener questions now, and then I'll finish by going over the details of a league that's got a spot for a couple of coaches. Someone's written in with the details for that. And then, of course, the competition that Finders Keepers is running to find a new coach for a league that I play in called Coaches Keepers. So on to the questions. At Hawker's Heroes is first up, and Hawker, great supporter of the pod. Love your work. And his question is, should I be worried as a Joel Frazier owner? 4 of the last 5 scores are in the 40s. Has there been a role change? His average has dropped about 6 points in a month. And look, just for extra context, Hawker did a trade for Frazier in the pre-season for Ari Schoenmaker with a pick swap as well. Look, short answer, no, I wouldn't be worried. Sure, it'd be nice if he was doing better. But you've just got to remember, he's 19. It's his second season of AFL footy. And yes, he started this year very hot and had some great scores in that first half of the year. I'm not surprised his scoring's dropped right down. It's a long season, and yeah, like I said, he's only young. The other thing too, and I touched on this in a recent episode, was that they've moved him around a lot, and I think Fraser needs to just be given a position to just stick with for the time being, whether that's off half back, to help Bailey Dale in that role, or if it's forward, or if it's on the ball, whatever it is. I think they just need to just stick with one spot for him. But no, I wouldn't be worried. I wouldn't be fielding him, but I'd be still very optimistic, Hawker, on his long term, because I see a player there. I think we all see it. He's got such a great size. He's kind of, at times you think it's Bont grabbing the contested footy, and no, it's this kid. And we know he can score in most positions. So be patient. You didn't give up a heap. It's not like Schoenmaker's done anything or much this year. And yeah, just wait and see what he can deliver in his third year in 2026. In fact, I'd go as far as saying he's a great buy low candidate. If you can target the coach in your league who has him, and they're a bit frustrated or worried, as Hawker is in his league, he's a player I definitely want to get across to my side. And then the next question here is, this is an absolute ripper, and it came through at the last minute, just as I'm recording this. It's come through from @Stonecutters FC, and it's about a trade that just went down in the league. Now, it's between two sides called, one of the sides is the Badgers and the other is the Dustbusters. And the Dustbusters have done this trade trying to get into finals, and they've just missed out. So have a listen to this trade. Actually, I'll read what Stonecutters has said, because there's a nice little pun. A pre-lockout trade went down in our league, and it's looking like a bust for the Busters, who have just missed finals. I like that. So, Badgers and Dustbusters have agreed to the following trade. The Badgers acquire Sam Darcy and Caleb Windsor. And Dustbusters acquire Jack Steele, Sam Doherty, Andrew McCrath, Cade Chandler, and Zach Williams. Both coaches are happy with the deal. So this was obviously a couple of weeks ago, because Doherty retired. And then he goes on to say, looking like this could be a sour deal for the Busters to look back on in future years, given Sam Darcy looks to be F1 for the next 10 years. Oh man, what a trade. So it's sounding like this side is so close to finals. They've given up Darcy and Windsor for this whole stack of players. Jack Steele, Doherty on his final run, McGrath, Chandler and Zach Williams. Oh man, I reckon, I like, you've got to be prepared to give up. Yeah, you've got to be prepared to give up gold if you want to strengthen your side and make that charge for finals. I wouldn't have given up Sam Darcy probably for anything, to be honest. Let's look at who we got back. So Jack Steele, obviously, yes. Oh man, I hope you weren't relying on Jack Steele this weekend gone to make finals, and he was a starting sub. That's a nightmare if that's the case. Anyway, look, it's a big trade. Kudos for trying to do everything you could to make finals, but I reckon you've gone too far letting Darcy go. And then for the Badgers, Sam Darcy, Caleb Windsor join your side really for, well, Jack Steele and a bunch of handy guys really. So yeah, I think Badgers would be absolutely stoked. Now there's a Badgers in one of my keeper leagues. I wonder if it's the same side. Wouldn't surprise me, because he's a pretty astute coach as well. Anyway, thank you Stonecutters FC for sending that in. That is a great late season trade between a side desperate for finals and someone who's happy to give up a lot of names to to get in one very good name, as well as Windsor, who I think in time will be quite the set of steak knives. And that's it for the listener questions this week. But before we do wrap up the podcast, there are a couple of matters of business I do want to attend to. And during the week, I got a message from someone named Ethan Prendergast, who is a listener of the show and has written in throughout the year a few times. So I appreciate the support, mate. And he's reached out because he runs a dynasty league that is unfortunately about to lose 2 coaches. So there's going to be 2 spots available in this league. And he reached out to me to see if I could just go through the details on the podcast, just to see if anyone's interested to reach out to Ethan. So some of the details you need to know: the league is called Church of Jai Simkin, which I'm sure there's a story to go with that, but I don't. It's a funny name. And it's a dynasty league run on Keeper Fantasy. There are 16 teams with 34 players on a list. They also run a classic and standard draft league as well. The league fees are roughly $7 a head. That just covers the ultimate subscription on Keeper Fantasy. The on-field formation is 6-6-1-6, and captains are turned on. And Ethan's also sent me a Google Doc with the league rules and the league history. And I had a quick look at it earlier, and let me tell you that the level of detail in these documents is just fantastic. So what that tells me is this is a good league. It's a deep league, 16 teams, that's huge. But it's run by a commissioner whose attention to detail is strong, and you need that to be organised and have a good league. So based on what I've seen, this is an awesome opportunity for someone. You know, you might be listening now, you've always wanted to play in a dynasty league or join another league, and you're willing to take over a team and try and make it your own. Now, the 2 sides that are available, one's playing finals at the moment, the other isn't, but has pick 2, I believe, in the upcoming draft. And I think it's a great opportunity if you're keen. So there's a lot more information that Ethan's given me, including all the draft picks each team has, their squads, the history of the league, heaps of detail for you to make an informed decision on whether or not you want to take the reins of one of these sides in this league. So if that's you and you're interested, reach out to Ethan on Instagram or on X. You can find him ethan.prendy on Insta, or on X at Ethan_Prendy. Or short of that, you can reach out to me on Finders Keepers and express an interest, and I'll get you in touch with Ethan. And hopefully we can get a couple of new coaches for that league. And then, of course, stay in touch next year and let me know how the new coaches get on and how they've approached taking a new side, because it's a different part of the game that not many people get to do, and there's all sorts of different strategies involved with that as well. So could be a good one to talk about next year. So reach out to Ethan or myself if you're interested in joining the Church of Jai Simkin. And finally, I've been teasing this for a couple of weeks now. One of the keeper leagues that I play in is losing a coach, and we need someone to step in and join us and take over that side. Now, this league is called Coaches Keepers. It's also on the Keeper Fantasy platform. This is actually only its 2nd season. We started it last year, so it's me and a whole group of Patreons from the coaches panel. It's a great league. Everyone in it is really engaged, switched on. It's very competitive. And looking forward to getting a new coach in to see if they can shake things up a bit. So here's how it's going to work. So over the next few days, I'm going to post, what the squad looks like that you'd be taking over, some of the league rules, how we play, etc. Just the stuff you'd want to know before you put your hand up for anything. And then the competition's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to put a tweet out asking for either the best, the worst, or just simply craziest trade you've ever seen or agreed to in a keeper or dynasty league. So I'll tweet it out later this week. I'll pin it to the Finders Keepers X page, and all you have to do is retweet it and give me your best answer, and then before the end of the season, a winner will be announced. So they're the details. Keep your eyes on Finders Keepers X page over the coming days for more details. And if it's something you're interested in and you do participate in the competition, well, I hope you win. And I look forward to seeing you in our league next season. But that's a wrap for this week's episode of Finders Keepers. Thank you for listening and thank you for your support all season. We are on the home stretch now. Not long left in the season at all. And good luck if you're lucky enough to have made finals and your final series starts this week. I wish you all the best. Have a great week as we approach round 22. I hope you get all the waiver wire picks you desire. And as I said, if you're in the finals, I hope you make a good start this weekend and get that W. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week, same time, to review round 22 and all the Keeper and Dynasty League implications. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.